Hello, good morning, everyone. This is Anupam Pushkar, and this is a followed up series from the previous week where we have seen few rundown about what we have done about application modernization. I'll go through that quickly in the next slide. Thank you for joining again and watching. In this video, we are going to a little bit more touch down few of the, I would say, a technical piece of it. We'll see some demo, but it's still in a immature state, but pretty much a good glimpse and how we are going to use APIs. We'll talk more about that. So without further ado, let's step in that what we have done on the previous week. So we have gone what is an overview of application modernization, what we were planning to learn over the weeks. Microservices, where do we start, what all those are, whatever my understanding are. Please feel free to leave some comments and some knowledge base wherever you came from, or if you want to discuss, do let me know as well. We discussed about what are web servers, what are API servers, how they talk to each other, how my front UI talks to backend API servers. So we talked more about that. We did some prep work in the Visual Studio for creating .NET websites. So I showed you one sample website which I'm creating called Transport. I'm really sorry for the street noise. As we spoke, right? So we are in progress of creating a transport web application where we are creating entire stack for a logistic company. Then we did run down some of the Microsoft documents which talk about what kind of application it is and how do we categorize when we are moving to the cloud. So this is what we have covered on a high level. I will again go through few of the API components today. So what we are doing today is we'll talk about the APIs. What are the use cases of APIs? We'll see some. I have just made one API, so unfinished API in Visual Studio. I will show you my project. We will publish the same into Azure Web Apps, and we'll configure API management, and we'll try to access over internet, and we'll understand what does that do, right? So this is where we are. We will go through that. So before we go inside, we will quickly view what all API options are, and this is a very beautiful, well-written uh, blog. Now let me click, and if I can make it large, yes. So the main type of APIs are REST APIs, RPC, SOAP, and GraphQL, right? What we are doing at this time and most commonly used is a REST. Traditionally, the quite before people tends to use more like a SOAP. Now RPC are quite in demand and mostly used, and it is mostly in demand in driving your complex microservices application. So that is where it is mostly used. Now let's quickly start and we will go through this the REST API which I have tried to build. Let me quickly go to my server. Yes. So I was making one API server. Now let me quickly give you the glimpse of it now. What does so I am having two projects within the same basically I'm having the same solution now that is called Transport API. This is the first one, and this is my website which I'm making. I'm sorry that the naming conventions are not good, but under the I think we saw this one before. Under Transport API, we have multiple folders and everything. I'll quickly just give you a brief. Of course, everybody know what is program.cs. Program.cx carry our basic configuration that what all services it is gonna use. So like we are using Swagger service, and I have used some. I have created one transport model. So we will be using that transport model. So we basically talk about that if you are using any builder services, right? Now in dependency, the packages what I have used is my .NET Core only. We have used .NET Core Entity Framework. I have used to develop this API application. Yeah, using this entity service, there are some predefined stuff which comes in, so we are using it. Now before I go to controller, I will show you my data model. In the data model I have two. One is called domain and another is called DTO. Within the domain, I just try to define, under transport, whatever we have in the database, we just have defined these ones. Same goes with the DTO. So basically, I'll come to DTO at a later stage. No, let me cover that DTO section later on. Now, primarily your controllers are defined from or an APIs are defined within under controllers. So you will have multiple controllers, right? So I have three different APIs basically defined here. One is a transportation controller, and weather forecast controller. So whenever you create a project, by default you will get a weather forecast controller. It's just a sample, which it is. I have created one transport controller which is more on a static, and this is what we will see when we move to the cloud, where I have created a HTTP get. Should I talk to you about the verbs of API? I think you must be knowing get, post, and delete, and all those verbs. So there are multiple verbs within API, right? So get, post, push, put, fetch, delete, copy. So there are many verbs within the API. So you need to understand that. Now get is more to get an information. We will talk more when we go on deep dive of the application. So this is a static one. Static when I say that it is an HTTP get, where I'm trying to get it. So I'm going to get this information, and this information is stored in a string array, and I have stored Dubai, LA, and Abu Dhabi. Now, when I will run this, I can get the information for it. Again, the by default one is a weather controller. You have again HTTP get here only to get a weather. So there's certain information predefined. So I'm not going to use this. I'm going to make it quite simple for you guys, and we will use a simple. So once we call this get, we will get all this data. Now, a little advance of it, I have already created the DB context file. So DB context file is nothing but how my DB modules are defined. If I go to models, I'm sorry. Within models, I have defined my DB context file within model itself. So I have defined all my DB connections. I have defined all my entity properties of my database. So all of these informations are already defined. Now, what does entity framework basically say? It's very important to understand that entity framework is a code first approach. So you write a code even for the database, and when you execute a DB context file, it actually go back into your database and creates it. But there are ways, that you can even recreate it back, right? So or I would say that many of the case you will get a database which has already been created and you're supposed to use. Then how do we use an entity framework? I actually saw some blogs, and based on that, it's surprising. Okay, so you have to use scaffold db context one command. um, I You could easily search on internet, and one of the colleague has made a very beautiful YouTube video as well, where you can use your existing database and start using in your code first approach. So this is what I have done. So I was already having a website, and I wanted to also have an API services, so I built that. So the command which you see, what you need to do is you need to go to your package manager console, and you need to run the command. So you can see that I have already executed my command in the console page. So I have got automatically populated all these information, the certain information in the backend. Okay, this is what my DB context file is. So I have created a DB context file within the entity framework which talk back to my database. So it helps us to just call the DB context file, and we are able to get fetch and modify any of our activities or wherever we need it. So going back to our transport API page. So first, what is a get? So I want to get all the information I have within my uh, so-called database. So what we have done is we have created a DB context file. So what I was trying to do is I was trying to configure the DTO. Now DTO is an additional security service which comes beyond. I will talk about DTO in some time. Once I have the DTO service, maybe on the next session. So I have my get command to get all my results from the DB context list, and then I can also filter it out using my filter where I can search for a certain ID and get a certain information. So without further ado, let's run this into WebIS and see how does it look like. So Swagger service is already there, so we can use it now. You can see that before we showed you that there is one static where we already defined everything in array. So we will get those information, click on tryout, execute, and we'll get status code 200, which is a success, and we got the body response, right? So this is coming from a static. Now let's go to this and execute, and what will happen is we'll fetch all the information of, again, status code 200, and we are going to get everything what is there in the database. So within the database I have all this information already stored. So all these entry came as a response. Now you would say that, Anupam, I would like to see that, right? So when you basically call uh, API, you need to keep that in mind that the way of calling is API slash transportation, right? This is what a standard way of making a call. So what I'm doing is I'm again I think, let me go to a new tab, and I've just put the localhost port number, API, this, click on send, and you will see that I get a response on the car, item, and everything. I don't have any security at this point of time. In fact, if you go here and put this, you will see that you'll get a response in a similar fashion, right? Now I got the response in this. Now maybe I want to just search for ID number 12. I want to go to Abu Dhabi to a lane, right, from the distance. Now I just showed you that we have something called with a filter. I'm searching with an ID. So let's try this out. We'll put 12 where it's gonna put the filter, and you can see that I just got a response which is my 12 filter based on ID. I've done a filter. So in a base of ID, if you want to do some update or find this and give the information about only a specific user, right? So it can execute a get command and it can populate those information on the backend. So this is what is all we can see using this coming from API through the Swagger. So there are two ways to find. One is first or default. So generally first and default is you can use it with, even though it's not a primary key, but if you are having your database that is a primary key, then it is recommended to use find. Otherwise it's we have to use first or default. That's pretty much. We will soon have more codes to do put and delete and everything in the down the line video series, and then we will explore more. Now this is how it looks. Now uh, let's try to publish into our portal. Okay guys, so we have logged in to our uh, Azure portal. Now let's quickly publish this, and when we are publishing my, since I don't have a database at this point of time in the cloud, I'll just check my DB controller, which is this one, and we will see the static information we'll put on the API services, and we'll do those testing as well. Without further ado, let's publish it. So before I publish, let me build my application and see if there is any error. All looks good, build success. Now let's publish it. So before publishing, what we need to do is we need to quickly add a publish profile. I'm going to publish it to Azure, click on next. I'm going to, at this time, Azure App Services, which is a Linux one, I'm going to publish into that. We can publish into container app services and everything. We will do it at later stage of the project, and we'll understand, what make more sense for us. For the quick, at the early stage of this, we will just use this instance. Seems like fast this time. Yes, we will call rg demo API. Let's click OK. We'll create a new instance. Again, the hosting plan, let it be called like this. I'll go UAE North. Click on OK. We'll create this. So first we are going to create an hosting plan. We can quickly also come and see if there is a resource group that is called RG demo API is getting created. Yes, you can see RG API demo is created. Let's see if there is any deployment going on this particular resource group. Yes, so there is one deployment which we can see is going on. Let's click on it. So deployment is in progress. So we have to wait for this deployment to complete, which is nothing but your coming from your Visual Studio itself. Let me close my window meanwhile. Yeah, okay. So my deployment is completed. We can go back to that particular resource group. Let's go to overview, and we can see, our hosting plan is done. Let's go back. Now we are going to use an app service. Basically, this app service is under that hosting plan, right? So we are going to use this. We don't have any deployment slots. And do we require an API management? I don't want to use an API management now, and we will use it at a later stage. I will show you. Let's click finish. Okay. So my things are getting published, my web service. So just keep in mind that does not mean that my web server is ready. Let's see quickly. Refresh. So you can see my transport is ready. Only my web app is ready. Does not mean my web server is hosted on it, right? So that is what it means. If you can see here, we have an option called publish. Let's see if our, first of all, the web app is up and ready. Yes. So you can see our web app is now running, and we are waiting for the content. So let's publish the content now. So we'll publish the content. So it's gonna take not so much time, depending upon how big is your application. In my case, it's quite small, so should not take much time. Okay, so build a success, publish a success, and waiting for restarting web API. So my web API is getting okay, web app is ready. uh, as we see that it will take some time, right? So let's wait for some more time before it can load. And now to access this, I'm sure you remember that we have to use API. Okay, so once I put this API transport, and you can see my data has fetched back. I cannot get the other one because I don't have a database, so for sure it's gonna fall an error. But now we can see that when we click on browse, there is no page because there is nothing called this, but it is defined under API transport. So what we can even do is we can quickly go to this postman, put the URL, and click on send, and we can see that we are getting the response as well. Now this is a quite plain vanilla. You can see that I'm getting a response, but we need to put a front end with API management, right? So that is what we should have it, so that we can control with the credentials and all. So what our job here will be is to bring in that service. Now there is by default on the, if you scroll down, you will get API management. So you can have an API created. So I don't want to create an API management from here. Let me go back. I'm going to create an API by myself. Let's create an API management. Okay, UA North. I want to keep it into subscription called demo API. Now resource name will be logistic API as a service. I'm sure you cannot take that. So API service, organization name, all world. I'll keep my email address. Okay. Now you have multiple pricing tiers. So in the pricing tier, what I'm going to use is I'm going to use based on consumption, and the cost is not so much. It is like if you run some like 500,000, then you will get some $14. I'm just gonna run 1 2 3 4, so it's more than enough. Now let's click on next monitoring. I'm not doing anything. I'm not scaling it. Managed entity I'm not using. Also the network I'm not using. So as I said before, you can use your own virtual network or private endpoints, and through that private endpoint you can connect to a particular API. I'm not using any protocol setting as well because it's my quick review. Click on create. So this particular API service actually take a lot of time to create sometimes. So we will have some patience, and once this is done, I'll come back to you guys. Okay, by the time this is getting deployed, let's go to Azure cost calculator. The most and the best way. Right, API management. Let's quickly see what does the API management says. Now there are multiple developers. So when you choose developer, by default, you know, your bare minimum price is $48. And if you are having a self-hosted gateway, then how many gateways we are talking about, like how many gateways we are putting in for that. Again, basic is 160, whereas if we go to standard, $700 per month, and $2,795, which is super expensive. And then additional charges you have is per hour, right? How many gateways you have per hour, additional $1. So if I have like three gateways, then just one gateway is like $1,000, right, for a month. Super expensive. So I love to use the consumption based. If I'm making into 10,000 calls, okay, 10k calls into one, then I have 0.02. So I'm more happy to run a consumption of this for our test case scenario. And I would prefer, if you are planning to just do for learning, use this, which is what I'm using now. So my API service deployment is complete and we can see the status is online. Now let's quickly go back and go back to our app services, but let me go through this itself. Now we can see API management here. In API management, we are going to use the API service which we just created. So now we are going to create a new API. So we will link this first. So what we are creating, create from a web app services. So I am just calling it as it is, the name, and the base URL is this. So for this particular app, this is what it is called. Now if we currently go to this particular URL, access is denied because I don't have a subscription key, of course. But let's define, let's click on get. So in the get, we need to define what is my get URL, and all these options are there. I can define the path as well, but I'll keep it like this. And the backend need to be defined. So um, let it be there. Now where do I get my subscription? So for that, again I need to go to my this. Let's click on API subscriptions, and this is my key, right? So let me go here, sure, hide my key. Okay, so guys, by the time you see my primary key, I might be already done a delete, so no worries for it. View, and I need to go to my API service, right? So let's call this API service, and instead of this I'm gonna use this. Let me send the data so you can see my access is denied. Now what we will do is we have to provide the subscription key. So I think I have already written before. Again I have to write OCP hyphen API management subscription key. So let's, value is this. Let's click on send, and you can see that we got the data. So basically we bring in an API management layer in the front, and we are fetching that data from that API management layer. That is quite a simple way of getting an extra layer of security. Again, you can have multi-layer of security that we can discuss at a later stage of the project, but we do need to understand when we are doing modernization that what kind of security we are talking about, how can we bring in more and more security at this layer. So that is very much important. So this is what we have covered at this stage. Let me quickly go. So my app layer is ready. You can see my service plan. Again, the service plan can be changed. So if you want to scale in or scale up or scale down, you can definitely do that. You can see here your app, what app we are running. Guys, this is what we will be covering for today. This is what I have done as a progress. In the next one, we'll be going to basically use little more advanced. I'll have some put as well. We'll have a web service. I'll make a front end UI. We are going to make a call from the front end UI to the API. Will fetch that information. Will show. Let's see how much I can progress on building those kind of an website. But this is where we are, and we will also push and publish more, and I'll play more in the next videos. That's it for today. We will connect again. Thank you for watching, guys. We'll meet in the next week, hopefully with some more updates and the next stage. So thank you for tuning in. Have a great day. Bye bye.